Hi, this is Deborah. Today I want to talk about some of the scariest parts of my life. The first one I remember is I was about 4.5 and I was with two of my little sisters and my mother in a trailer in Winchester. Back in the late 50s, there was no electricity. Well, there was electricity to the trailer, but not to our farmhouse, which we were remodeling behind it. We had no telephones. And we were on the bed, me and my mother, I'll never forget this, gluing in S&H green stamps. And then all of a sudden she saw two men come around the trailer, and she told me to take two of my sisters into the bathroom and try to keep them as quiet as possible, because if they heard that there was somebody in there, those two men could have come in there and who knows what would have happened. But it was very, very scary because I was able to keep my sisters quiet. They didn't say a word, thank God. But I remember how frightened my mother was. That was really, really scary. They very pounded. I mean, they pounded forever, but they eventually left. Okay, the next time I think I got scared is when I lived in Oakton. We lived right to the right of the Zook store. Anybody who knows anything about Oakton, the Zook store was an old country store where back then in the late 50s and early 60s you could just sign your name, and that was good enough back then if you needed to charge something. Well, my sister supposedly stole a $50 bill out of my mother's purse, and she went next door to the Zook store and bought a phone, a plastic phone. And next thing I know, I think the police are there, and my mother could not find my sister. And we looked and looked and looked, and we had to, we found out that she had taken the money because the lady who ran the Zook store, Mrs. Zook, told my mom that she'd come in there with a $50 bill and bought a plastic toy purse. So I knew my sister's hiding places, and I remember there was a bush. There was a bush behind our house that had so much foliage that you could hide underneath of it, and no one would see you. And daggone, there she was. I don't know if my mother whipped her or not, but that was a little scary, knowing that my sister could have been kidnapped. Let's see, the next time I got scared is when my children were in diapers and my husband was working in Fairfax. I remember we lived in Moraddick, and I remember one day the lightning was so horrible, I thought it was going to strike the house. That was very scary. I mean, it was relentless, thunder. And I remember, I've never been scared of thunder before, but that thunder was right over top of the house. It was very frightening. So let's see. The next time I got very scared is when I had driven from Satellite Beach, was on my way to Dallas, Texas, and I was in a LeBaron convertible, and I just had my water jacket, something replaced in the engine. Had something to do with the water jacket or whatever. I don't know. Maybe it was the serpentine belt. And I was in Louisiana, and I had my dog Elvis. Now, I had most of my possessions in that car because I was going to live with my husband in Dallas, Texas while he was in college. So I had my dog Elvis, which is a miniature dachshund. And I had a TV in my purse and everything. I believe the top was down. And all of a sudden, on top of a Louisiana bridge, the motor just stops. I eventually found out that a bolt came out of the water jacket and froze up the engine. Now, I had tried on the way, because it was like a 20-hour drive, I had tried to get somebody to help me put water in it. I could not get anybody to help me, and then I did not know that all the water had gone out. So I had to make a decision. Now, I'm on top of Louisiana bridges. If you've ever driven through there, you know there are no pullover lanes on those bridges in those parishes. So I had to make a decision, and I knew that I was going to get hit by a car or a truck or a tractor trailer if I stayed on top of that bridge. I knew I was going to be pushed off of the bridge. So I made the decision to abandon the vehicle, and I got my dog, my purse, and just ran off the bridge. And I was so scared, and I looked around to look back at my car, and I said, someone's gonna hit it. I mean, because you could not help but hit it. And this lady picked me up, and I said, why did you pick me up? She says, well, I didn't think you would be a murderer since you're carrying your dog with you. And she was a school teacher, and she pretty much saved me, but I was in shock. I was in shock to the point that I really couldn't hardly talk. The police arrived, and one cop was getting ready to write me up. I go, what? And the lady who saved me kept saying, she's in shock. You can't get too much out of her, because I was in shock. So we were standing next to my car on top of the bridge with tractor trailers coming, and I go, officer, you would have done the same thing if you were in my position. You know, I got that much out. And he goes, I don't think so. All of a sudden, a tractor trailer came up and hit my car and pushed it. And he turned around and he goes, you're right. I would have done the same thing. And he tore up the ticket. So then I got my car towed. But that was probably one of the most frightening things I have ever had to deal with. I did have a bad burglary. It was very recently, but I think that will go into that's a whole video in itself. All right, I hope you enjoyed those stories. They're frightening.